Hey there, Chris here with another little history of Garrett County talk. And today I'm going to be talking about the history of Swallow Falls State Park that I've subtitled Ferris Wheels and Freemason Gold. And you'll see why when we dig into some of the little twists and turns along the path to become a state park. I'm your host, Chris Nichols. I am a local real estate agent with TaylorMade Deep Creek Sales. I'm also a local cartographer, having made some really cool, I think, maps of Garrett County, Deep Creek Lake, some great trail maps and stuff to do outdoors in Garrett County. But without further ado, let's jump in to the history here. Swallow Falls, the official description says it's 257 acres. It's home to Muddy Creek Falls, the tallest free-falling waterfall in Maryland, and then 2 or 3 other scenic falls, depends on if you count upper and lower part of Swallow Falls as separate ones. Little side note of where Swallow Falls got its name is the colony of swallows, the birds that lived in the kind of that rock column right at the base of the falls. So not a lot of mystery with that, but interesting little side note as to where the falls got their name. And part of the magic of the place is the setting as well. It's in this rocky canyon. It's in a deep cover of forest that's a lot of oldish growth forest of hemlocks and white pines. So it just creates a really nice setting to go along with the waterfalls. But there's some interesting little tidbits. So this whole area was owned once by the Freemasons. If you've seen any movies with the Freemasons in there, you know they're always stashing gold all over the place. If you've ever seen a National Treasure. But, you know, that's just a kind of a fun little sidelight, but we'll find out if they stashed any gold in behind the falls. And an electric train line was supposed to run by there, was proposed to go along the Yak River Valley, and even amusement parks along the way, which would have been powered by various hydroelectric projects from the Youghiogheny River that would have either dammed the Yak or piped off water to power this train line and amusement parks and a variety of other projects that were planned but didn't ever come to fruition. So there's been a lot of interesting things that have happened along the way to become the must-see park in Garrett County that it is today. And if you can't make it out in person to go to see this park and some of the trails, you can check out my video trail tours. I'm working on doing all of them for the county, and I definitely have some nice ones for the canyon trail around the state park area, and then the Anglers Trail on the other side of the Youghiogheny River, which is also a really nice overlooked little trail in Garrett County. Just to orient ourselves as to where we are, these are snapshots from some of my maps. The big one's the Garrett County wall map, and then the details are my ultimate adventure map showing trails and camping and all kinds of outdoor stuff to do. You can see from the Garrett County map that Swallow Falls is in the western part of the county along the Youghiogheny River, which flows from south to north. And zooming in a little more detail, it's actually very close to Deep Creek Lake, but it never seems like that because there's kind of some winding roads to get there. And then zooming into the most detail, we see the Youghiogheny River here, and Swallow Falls the state park is generally defined by the Yak, Muddy Creek, and Tolliver Run. And you can see in red that canyon trail there. There's the Anglers Trail, called the Fisherman's Trail here, on the other side of the Yak, and they get into these nice canyons where there's all kinds of cool rock features, and of course some good spots to check out, both Muddy Creek Falls, Swallow Falls, and the nice little charming Tolliver Falls back here. And these falls and rivers were carved out about 300 million years ago in the Pennsylvanian era, geologically speaking, so they are literally old as dirt. It's always important when you're talking about, who owned what and who has it now, is, originally that all of this land was occupied and quote unquote owned by indigenous peoples who used it and traveled along, and we essentially took that from them, and it's important to always remember that. Here we see in this map is a history reference map of the county, and shows, right here's Friendsville area, here's Swallow Falls, and you can see in yellow are the general routes of the trails that indigenous peoples used to travel the area. Generally, they use the yacht corridor to go north-south. There are a couple of indications of transient settlements that have been found in orange, I believe. But generally, these were just passing through type of spots. There were some hunting and fishing kind of stopover villages, but generally it's pretty rocky and inhospitable to put any sort of long-term settlements up there. Looking as into when settlement of this area occurred, really it was first opened up technically in 1774 when Lord Baltimore allowed the lands west of Fort Cumberland to be settled. A lot of land speculators were interested in procuring pieces of land because they thought they were going to be valuable pieces of property they could sell out to farmers and to people who wanted to graze animals. And these big chunks were patented or kind of claimed. This is a map showing from 1874, showing some of these big lots that were patented back in that period. Also in this map show all these little squares, which were military lots that the Maryland State Legislature divided the rest of the area into as rewards or payments for soldiers in the Revolutionary War. And the plan was to give these lots as payment and to settle these western areas that were largely empty and start generating good old tax dollars for the state. That plan really didn't come to fruition. Most of the veterans ended up just essentially flipping their property. They got their property, sold them to speculators, and moved on. So they may be the first Garrett County flippers. But the land still continued to be fairly unused and uninhabited. But you can see here, even back then, they made a point to mark the falls of Muddy Creek. Here's the Youghiogheny. Here is Deep Creek, before there was a Deep Creek Lake. And some of the familiar landmarks are here even in this kind of older map. So as I said, the land and area remained fairly uninhabited, undeveloped, until industrial scale lumbering operations came on the scene. So big sawmills that were either water or steam powered, and railroads that could get into these areas and extract the timber and get them out to markets. And so until those technologies became available and widely deployed, this area really stayed undeveloped. And this map shows this area from 1900, and it's a 1900 topographical map. So here's Swallow Falls at the bottom, Friendsville's at the top, and you can see the Youghiogheny stretching between them. In 1898, a company called A. Nab & Company bought a 1,353-acre tract of land containing what would be Swallow Falls State Park and a lot of other property there. The company was operated out of the town of Krug, which I have circled there, which was named after a guy named Henry Krug. And we'll see a little bit more of him later, but he was one of the owners of this A. Nab & Company and kind of an industrialist of the time and place around here. When A. Nab bought this piece of property down here, they intended to continue the rail line that they had from Krug. They had one already existing down to Sang Run. There was one running from Friendsville to Krug. So they intended to continue it down here and use that railroad to continue to extract all the lumber out of there and get it up north along this corridor and out to a larger rail line out in the confluence and then to Uniontown. They also were starting to think about connecting up with the tourist traffic that was already visiting Swallow Falls. This, remember, in the late 1800s, the B&O Railroad had kind of opened up Oakland, Mountain Lake Park, Loch Lynn, Deer Park, with these big, huge luxury hotels along the railroad that then spawned the cottages, quote unquote. These were also very big, luxurious houses that the rich bought for summer homes. So those people who were summering here would often take a stagecoach, a horse and buggy type conveyance from Oakland to Swallow Falls to picnic there. And there was already the thoughts of incorporating these rail lines that were variously planned to pick up that tourism traffic as well. But ANAB and company never built this connector, this piece of railroad, and they sold their interests and about 10,000 acres of land to the Kendall brothers. And their company was the Manor Land and Oakland Railroad Company. They also intended to build that connector line and a resort at Swallow Falls in that area. So the plans kind of keep just getting bigger as the companies acquire this property. Importantly, though, that Henry Krug reserved from the sale, from this property transfer, a tract of land around Muddy Creek Falls that had a grove of old growth hemlock. He already at this time recognized the importance of kind of preserving that and not wanting to make that available for timbering and to preserve the beauty of the falls. But you can see in this article from the early 1900s talking about this company, the Manor Land and Oakland Railroad Company, that wanted to build the railroad through Swallow Falls and then to Oakland to connect all of that together. But that also never panned out, and the Kendall brothers bought another company out of Crellin, another very big tract of land, and that also had that particular operation had its own connection to the B&O Railroad. So the Swallow Falls line kind of lost the priority battle there. But another company kind of sprang up and took up this idea. So the Youghiogheny Light and Power Company hatched a plan for a hydroelectric plant on the Youghiogheny, not necessarily a dam. Apparently the plan was to just tap water off in a pipe from the Yough and then send it through into a impulse type turbine, like a power plant, to generate electricity. And this electricity would power a fire brick plant, a porcelain factory, and an electric rail line that would eventually run from Oakland to Uniontown. And all of this electricity would then also power up some amusement parks along the way. So you can see in the upper right-hand corner some of the plans for that. This is out of a Pittsburgh newspaper. And one character in particular, Hiram Tasker, it kind of keeps popping up in some of these discussions as one of the spearheads of this particular project. And he was apparently quite a character. One source I found described him as a mentally unbalanced alcoholic polymath. And the plan never panned out. He tried to pitch it to the city of Baltimore, and that was never taken up. But it certainly didn't lack for vision. And I can't imagine why it didn't pick up, because Hiram himself says this is certainly the safest and most profitable investment ever offered to the public. But anyway, I hope to dig into Hiram Tasker's story a little bit more. He sounds like quite an interesting character. So while all of these plans for developing the Yough River corridor and damming it up were developing, there were also some industrialists and landowners who were starting to realize the value of philanthropy and conservation. And in 1906, the grandsons of the namesake of Garrett County, Robert and John Garrett, these were the grandsons, ended up donating about 1,900 acres near Oakland to the state of Maryland if the state would take over management of those forests. And our state senator at the time in Garrett County, William McCullough Brown, essentially got legislation enacted that would created the Maryland State Board of Forestry. And the board's first hire was a guy named Fred Besley, and it turned out to be a great hire. He was a graduate of a new Yale forestry program, and he served as the first state forester for the state of Maryland for the next 36 years and was a tireless champion of conservation of state property for the enjoyment of the public, and one of the pivotal people in getting Swallow Falls protected and owned by the state so it could be managed and appreciated by everyone. So you can see here on the right, this is, I think, one of the documents that Besley was involved in helping to produce. It's kind of one of the first flyers for state parks and state lands in Maryland. And you can see down here this kindness. This little block was one of the blocks that the Garrett brothers donated over the course of the next few years. Some other blocks of land were donated. This Harrington Manor was donated. This one called Harrington Manor was donated by some other people and has now become Harrington Manor State Park. But interestingly, this Swallow Falls block isn't at Swallow Falls. Swallow Falls is up here. So right as of this time, Swallow Falls is still not owned by the state and kind of unregulated and under threat for all of these development projects. So who owned Swallow Falls at this point? Well, originally my whole interest in this subject was piqued when a friend of mine, Morgan France, who's a long-term surveyor in the county, gave me a map of Deep Creek Lake from 1925 that was used to hang in the office of the power plant. And a very cool piece of history. So it was made by Charles Hawley Company, which were the consulting engineers for the construction of the dam. And the map, when you see it, it's enormous. It's probably 4 by 5 feet, showing a lot of great detail and shows all of the property owners of the lake bed and surrounding areas. And in the corner of this map, kind of in real faint faint writing, is this notation of 1/2 the Grand Lodge of AF and AM of Pennsylvania, 1/2 the Grand Lodge AF and AM of West Virginia. And it's a very mysterious kind of thing down in the bottom corner of this map. I wasn't quite even sure if it applied to this piece of property here. But on doing some more research, you find that AF and AM means Ancient Free and Accepted Masons. And as it turns out, the Freemasons did own Swallow Falls, Muddy Creek Falls, and that whole area. So if you remember Henry Krug, he was the guy who kind of kept that piece of land separate from all of the industrial transactions. He was a Freemason, and in 1914 he died with no descendants and left this piece of land to the Freemason lodges of West Virginia and Pennsylvania, of which he was a member. And how I found this out, and subsequently was confirmed by some other sources, is I reached out to the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania through their website, and their excellent librarian Kathy was back within a day of just a wealth of information about Mr. Krug and his bequeathment and a lot of interesting detail on that end. So she was extremely helpful. Found some really interesting stuff about what this bequeathment was supposed to do, was help to develop a retreat for the Freemasons, and also the proceeds were to help build a rest home for older Freemasons. But I think just due to the distance and the logistics, the retreat at Swallow Falls, Muddy Creek Falls, never really happened. And it was really just kind of a piece of property that was still out, that people still went out to and enjoyed and used, but there was no real regulation, there was no management of it, and importantly, there was no real management or restrictions of the inflow areas. And you can see that in this 1915 letter from a DC area physician who had a home in Oakland, and he wrote an opinion letter to the editor of the Baltimore Sun talking about how picnicking at Swallow Falls used to have a wondrous beauty surrounded by a virgin forest unsurpassed in rugged grandeur, but a hideous metamorphosis has taken place. The falls are now reeking with sawdust, and the shade that was used to be there is now reduced to continuities of stumps. And this is the first call for conservation and protection of the falls that I've been able to find, and it pretty interesting source for that from the Baltimore Sun in 1915. Another good bit of promotion for the grandeur of the falls came from the visits of the Vagabonds. If you're not familiar with them, it was Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Harvey Firestone, so three of the biggest captains of industry, and naturalist John Burroughs. And they, through friendship and some associations, started traveling together in the 1920s, a little bit before 1920 and after. And they did a series of what we'd probably call today car camping expeditions. They had some specially outfitted vehicles that Ford had put together, and they went camping around in natural settings. They called themselves the Vagabonds, and they just generally enjoyed nature and had a good time. And in 1918 and 1921, various combinations of the Vagabonds group visited the falls. So there's a good story about the Vagabonds group showing up, and there was already a group of boys camping in the prime camping spot, so Ford or one of the guys paid off the kids to get them to skedaddle and vacate the prime camping spot. And that just kind of goes to how really unmanaged and unregulated this spot was just kind of a free-for-all for people showing up and enjoying the falls, but not really any management or conservation of it there. But the big, and there's a lot of other great stories of the Vagabonds visiting this spot that maybe will probably be yet another presentation. But really for this particular presentation, the big impact was the publicity of this and the fact that a lot of people saw what a great spot this was. This picture in the upper right of Ford resting, cooling his feet off in the Youghiogheny was published in papers across the country, and it definitely calls out that he's camping at Swallow Falls, Maryland, and just shows the a lot of the people picked up of how nice this was and what a nice natural spot these were. This is Thomas and his wife Mina Edison at the top of Muddy Creek Falls, and this was a rock, and you can recreate this picture today if you want, of Thomas Edison sitting there. Apparently this was one of his favorite spots to sit and just kind of think and hang out. And it's speculated that Besley arranged an invite to the group specifically so that they would see and spread the word on how great and worthy of conservation these sites were. Mina Edison apparently was one of the driving forces behind a lot of conservation projects, and so Besley may have had a captive audience in mind there. But while, Besley is kind of maneuvering to get state control of this, there's still some threats that are, kind of pop their head back up every so often. In 1924, the Youghiogheny Power and Light Company kind of revamped the plan to generate electricity from the Yough, and this time there was a dam planned. So there was a dam at the upstream of Swallow Falls, a hydroelectric dam that the company was proposing, and Charles Hawley, the consulting engineer we saw from that map, who was part owner and consulting engineer, that admitted in public that the dam would dry Swallow Falls. And he ended up sparring with Besley in a series of letters to in the Baltimore Sun, that it wouldn't really be a big deal because Swallow Falls really were just little rapids in the river. But public opinion, public outcry, an editorial in the Baltimore Sun proclaiming the importance of conservation and the fact that Swallow Falls should be protected, and even the governor of Maryland reluctantly got involved and kind of put the kibosh on the plan to dam the Youghiogheny River. So Youghiogheny Power and Light had to just make do with just a dam on Deep Creek. And we all really know how that turned out. That turned out pretty well for them. So that was not a bad consolation prize. And then one more kind of the idea to put some dams along the Youghiogheny cropped up in the 1940s. This time as a federal project, and multiple dams were proposed. One, again, upstream of Swallow Falls. So you can see this map is a little differently oriented. North is to the left, so the Youghiogheny is flowing right to left here. And there would have been a dam upstream of Swallow Falls, another hydroelectric project, and that would have co-fed the power plant of the Deep Creek power plant there. There would have been another hydroelectric dam at Sang Run, which would have fed a power plant in Friendsville. And then there would have been kind of a flood control and surge volume dam at around Crellin, which would have created a pretty big impoundment around there. And so a very substantial project that essentially would have dried the Youghiogheny River, dried Swallow Falls, and didn't really make it past the proposal phase. It was World War II, and there were a lot bigger projects to make happen. So that kind of died on the vine before anything came of that. So Besley's been working this time to kind of get Swallow Falls under some sort of Maryland management and protection. In 1922, those two Grand Lodges of West Virginia and Pennsylvania granted the Maryland Forestry Board jurisdiction, at least, over that 600-acre site. And the Forestry Board began building camping spots and picnic areas and more infrastructure, roads and trails. When the Great Depression hit and the Civilian Conservation Corps were activated and utilized, they came out and had a couple of companies worked on projects, both Swallow Falls and Harrington Manor and other state property throughout the county. And that's probably enough material for yet another presentation. So they built, the Civilian Conservation Corps built a number of structures and some lasting legacy at all of these sites that have kind of built the groundwork for today's developments. And in 1940, the Swallow Falls Recreation Area officially opened. And later that month, the state authorized and eventually followed through on a full purchase of the property from the Freemason lodges. From then, the development of the Swallow Falls we know today, it was a little bit bumpy. Budget cycles, World War II, kind of kept big development of campgrounds and more roads and that kind of stuff from happening. But a big post-war boom in the 50s and then 60s of people being interested in traveling by car and camping drove a lot more developments at the site, and the state of Maryland really prioritized, making this a destination state park. And I believe sometime in the 60s, it officially became a state park that allowed it to get some more funding and attention. And largely now is the layout and the buildings and the operation that we know today. So that's kind of the the trail from prehistoric days to today of how Swallow Falls became, one of the crown jewels in the Garrett County and Maryland State Park system. And if you want a really good, in-depth history of that, the best resource I found is actually a fairly obscure document. It's a submission of the inventory of historic properties that discusses the history of all of this stuff at that link. That's really where I got a lot of the source data from. If you are interested in maps, most of the maps that I've used throughout this presentation can be found at the Garrett County Historical Society's virtual map room. You can go download those maps, high quality, high resolution maps of there at that map room. And if you've made it this far into this presentation and you're not a member of the Garrett County Historical Society, you should join. It's just $25 a year, and you get 4 copies of the Glade Star, which has lots of great history of the county, and you'll just be generally supporting the promotion and preservation of our local history. And then a lot of those newspaper articles I got at newspapers.com, but a lot from the online archives of the Glade Star and the Republican newspaper. Those 2 are free, and those were very helpful as well. So I hope you learned a little bit. I enjoyed putting this presentation together. There's my mascot Deaky enjoying the falls, and I like to go out and check out all the great stuff of Garrett County in person, and then hopefully give you a little flavor of it by making these videos. So if you want to know any more about this particular piece of history or any other, I'd be happy to chat further. And if you have any real estate needs, I'd be happy to talk more about that as well. So till I happen to meet you out in the real world, I hope you enjoyed this video, and take care.